Okay,
Yes.
I'm Nona Baker. I'm co-chair of MPN Voice, and I'm going to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. And I say that because we've got people around the world joining us for this webinar. Welcome to you all. Today, we have an exciting webinar. We have got the team who have created the brand new MPN Voice app, and they're going to tell you all about it and show you how it works. But just a few housekeeping points before we start. Photos or screenshots taken of any slides by the presenters can only be used by you for personal use or reference for copyright and data protection regulations. They mustn't be posted on any social media pages or platforms, websites, online forums, etc. And now I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Claire Harrison, who is going to tell you about the app.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Harrison. I'm super excited to be here this evening just to give you an introduction to what we're going to talk about and to tell you why I'm so excited that MPN Voice has been able to launch My MPN. So you've just had the introduction from Nona. I'm going to talk to you about my vision for the app. Then we're going to show a video, which is a quick automated view of the app. Then Patrick Harrington, who is a consultant colleague from our service who has been involved with the Sanius team, who are our partners who are also here today, is going to talk you through nuts and bolts of the app. Claire Woodley, who is our advanced nurse practitioner for the myeloid service at GSTT, is going to talk about your MPN symptoms and why it's important to monitor them. And then Debbie and Mark are going to give you a walk through the app features. As I mentioned, we've got our partners from the Sanius team here today. We're super grateful to all of you for joining us. And then we'll have a panel Q&A. We'll try to focus mainly on the questions on the app, but we will also try to zip through some of the other questions. So I thought it was important to give you some context about the app and think about what is it I want as a clinician and as a clinician who is trying to work with patients and others to move forward care for our patients. So what I want is, I want to be able to empower patients in our service at Guy's and St Thomas's, but as far and wide as possible. So it's great that we've got international colleagues here on the call. I want to empower them by providing them the latest information about their disease, which we try to do anyway through MPN Voice, but you'll be able to do that through the app. Empower them to hold their own data. If you've seen me in the past, you may have heard me say, make a spreadsheet of your data, hold your own symptoms. It helps you to understand your disease. We want to be able to enhance understanding of the disease. And in order to be able to do that, we need to be able to understand, as your team of healthcare professionals, how the disease is impacting you. And then something I had wished that I had had 23 years ago, yes, when I started as a consultant at Guy's and St Thomas's, was our ability to gather big data. We have no idea, we can roughly guess, but we have no idea how many patients with an MPN there are in the UK, for example, how they're treated, etc. And so our partnership with Sanius in developing this app should give us the opportunity, obeying UK data laws, as you'll hear soon, to do that. And that ultimately will enable progress in the field. So I think we should be explaining the app to you today, but we should be celebrating as a community, because this is a big step forward and potentially offers us the opportunity to deliver on many of these items that I'm sort of thinking about and dreaming about as a wish list. So thank you to everyone in this webinar who has made the app possible, and a lot of people have been involved, but I especially want to thank Patrick, Debs, Mark and the Sanius team. And I want to thank you to patients who have already expressed an interest, who are already signed up and are helping us to move this project forward. And so that's enough from me. And now we're going to move on and show you a short video.
When I get low, somewhere I like to go. Out walking with my shadow in my garden friend. Oh, your way, I know you got me in hand. Though I am tired, you help me stand. But will I be okay? Oh, we'll be alright. Will I be okay? Oh, we'll be alright.
So everyone, this is Patrick. Patrick is, as I mentioned already, one of our consultants at Guy's and St Thomas's. He's done lots of research in MPN before, and he's been really driving forward the development of the app with the team. Over to you, Patrick. Looks like your slides are up now.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So thank you for that introduction. And I'd like to thank everyone again for giving up their time to join us this afternoon to hear about more about the very exciting new MPN app, which we're calling My MPN Voice, and which is now live and has been live for the last few weeks. And some of you may have already signed up to this. So we would hopefully hear feedback from those who have later on this afternoon. So I'm going to start by going into some of the objectives behind the app in a bit more detail before we get a live demo, which goes into the detail of what the app can do. And that's kindly being provided by Debs and Mark. So the background behind the app, and this is something we've been working on for over a year now after initial meetings at conferences and discussions with various people from the Sanius team and people who've developed other apps. And it's a collaboration between the MPN Voice team, the executive team, many of whom are here today, alongside the Sanius team. So Sanius are a biotech company who have a great expertise in developing these kind of digital health innovations and have significant technical expertise. So it's been really great working with them. And what we really wanted to do was to create a bespoke app for patients with myeloproliferative neoplasms to allow them to record the details around their treatment, such as symptoms, as well as things like medications. And really the goal behind that was to improve patient empowerment. And we also thought that in the process of doing this and collecting all this data from patients, something that could be really useful from a research perspective would be to provide real world insights into what's happening with patients with MPN across the country, and then perhaps at a later point further afield. So today what we're hoping to do is to invite everyone to get in touch with a view to signing up to the app, and as well as the research study which the app is intertwined with, as we'll go on to discuss. And we'll go into more detail as to what this involves. So what are the objectives of the app? Well, the overall objective is to provide a resource to allow patients to record various aspects of the information relating to their myeloproliferative neoplasm condition. And as I said, the goal really is to improve patient empowerment. So this would include things such as tracking of symptoms. And one of the main ways that we do this is using the MPN 10 symptom assessment form, which many of you will be familiar with. So this lists the 10 most common symptoms that are observed in patients with MPN, and each is scored on a 0 to 10 scale. And then this provides a total symptom score, which is measured out of 100. We also have the potential to record other scoring systems, such as the EQ5D5L score, which monitors various quality of life metrics, and there are some additional ones as well. Another function of the app is it allows us to track treatments as well as doses of different treatments. And this allows patients to monitor how these can impact on their disease course. So the idea is that patients will eventually be able to present their data to treating clinicians to provide them an insight into the longitudinal assessment of their condition. And that's something that I think will be really useful. As you'll go on to see, we can track trends in symptoms and how that interlinks with changes in medication or changes in dose. And that's something that we're hoping patients will be able to display to their treating clinicians. And overall, what we're really hoping is that the app will improve the quality of life of those who are affected by myeloproliferative neoplasms, as well as mentioned, as providing a resource for research purposes to allow us to gain more insight into the management of these conditions. So as mentioned earlier, this project has a number of different stages, which are all slightly different. So this slide kind of goes into a bit more detail of that. So the first stage, which is currently open, is the stage in which patients have access to the app, but also receive a wearable device that tracks biometrics of things like activity indices, sleep scores, and it can even do things like measure oxygen saturation and record heart rhythms and check heart rates. And this is all part of a research study. So data is collected and used by researchers for research purposes. Unfortunately, we don't have unlimited resources, so we can't guarantee that everyone who wants to sign up will be offered a device, although at the moment, everyone who is signing up should be getting one. But we do predict at a later point, a larger group of patients will sign up to the app, and these patients will only have the app and will report their patient-reported outcomes, but won't have a wearable device because we won't have sufficient of these to offer to everyone. But these patients will also be part of the research study, and so their data will be collected if they consent for that to be done. Further down the line, we will have a third stage of the app, which will be available as a light version, and this is just for patients to record their patient-reported outcomes. But these patients won't be part of the research study. So if patients want to use the app but don't want to consent for their data to be collected, that's absolutely fine and fully understandable. But that's not open yet, but that will become available at a later point. And in these patients, no data will be collected, so they'll just have the app and just be able to record all their scores, but the data won't be collected. And then I know we've got some overseas attendees today. So the fourth stage of the project, which is relevant to them, is a light version of the app, which will be available globally. That's going to be subject to various regulatory approvals, so it's not available yet. But again, that's something that we're aspiring to do in the not too distant future. So it's very important to all of us at GSTT, MPN Voice and Sanius that all of your data is kept safe. And this slide goes into some detail about how this is done. So firstly, I should point out that data is strictly confidential. There are clear data encryption and protection services via Microsoft Azure, which is recognized to be one of the most advanced methods for doing this. I should also point out that data is protected as per GDPR rules, and you maintain the right to withdraw from the study at any time. So even after consenting for the study, if you change your mind and decide that you no longer want to be part of it, that's absolutely fine, and we won't have any problem with that, and you can withdraw from the study. It's also important to know that personally identifiable data is only accessible by you and the Sanius data controller. So the data controller is a member of the Sanius team who has access to this identifiable data for the purposes of building this into the digital platform, and it wouldn't be possible to do this without this key person in the team from having that information. Once the data controller has done this, then anonymized non-identifiable data extracts are available for the research team, and this is used for standard research purposes. So we're hoping this will result in scientific publication in various different journals, as well as presentations at patient conferences and clinical conferences. But it's important to note that only the data controller and the chief investigator has access to identifiable data. So it's really secure in keeping with standard research studies. So with regards to data storage and transfer, again, the safety and security of your data is paramount. So as the data controllers, Sanius have the following security certifications, which are listed here. So these include the ICO, ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials, Data Security and Protection Toolkit, and Cyber Security Center Web Check. I don't know what all of these mean, but what I can say is that this has been through our information security team at Guy's and St Thomas's, who are experts in this, and they were very satisfied with the degree of security that Sanius offered with regards to data storage and transfer. And so that was very reassuring. So I should point out that the data is transferred to a cloud database with cybersecurity offered by Microsoft Azure, as mentioned. And the key thing really here is that this is, as a research study, it's being sponsored by Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust. And as such, GSTT, the NHS Trust, owns the data. It's not owned by any external companies, or it's not owned by Sanius, it's owned by GSTT. And because it's a research study, it's been reviewed by our internal research and development team who approved the study. They were happy with it and felt that it met all of the required aspects, and it's also had ethical approval from an external ethics committee as well. So it's been through both of these critical steps to confirm that the study is being conducted appropriately. So shown on this slide are a number of FAQs which are also available via the microsite, which we'll go on to discuss later, but I'll just run through a few of them quickly. The first one says, do I have to take part? And the answer to that is no. It's completely up to you whether you decide to take part in the research study. And as mentioned earlier, if you decide that you want to use the app, but don't want to be part of the research study and don't want your data collected, that will be possible imminently as well. If you have concerns about the study, who should you speak to? That is me. So you can email me, and my email is listed there, and it's also available on the microsite. So that's specifically if you have concerns about aspects of the study, for instance, the use of data, that kind of thing, then I'm the person to contact, and hopefully I can reassure you in that respect. If you're having technical issues with the app, then the best people to contact are the Sanius Health team, who have lots of expertise in this, and their email address for that is listed there, support@saniushealth.com. And then there are a couple more technical questions, such as how often do I need to wear my watch? The answer to that is that we encourage people to wear the watch for as much time as possible. That includes overnight, which allows us to track things like sleep scores. You can also wear it, it's water resistant, for instance. So we encourage people to wear the watch as much as possible. The next question is, my account is not approved, what should I do? So there are a few different aspects to the approval, which we'll touch on in the next slide, I think it is. But essentially, once you've completed something called the subject access request form, the account will be pending and it will be approved shortly after. We do know that whilst we've only been up and running for a couple of weeks, and there perhaps have been a couple of teething issues in trying to get everyone approved as quickly as possible. So if there are people who have tried to sign up and haven't yet been approved, please don't worry. We are aware that there are people who are in that situation, and we are working through people as quickly as possible, with the knowledge that obviously there was a great interest in this when we first launched. And so we're trying to do things gradually to try and provide the appropriate support to patients in batches, essentially.
I'm taking part in that study. Well, hello.
Oh, sorry, could we
Carry on, Patrick. We just need to make sure everyone's muted. Thanks.
Thanks. Then there's another one about, can I add more than one medication reminder? That's something that will become clear when you have the walkthrough of the features of the app, but the answer to that is yes. And I won't go into things like my watch time is incorrect, because I'm probably not the best person to advise on that. So this slide goes through the process of the workflow of signing up, and what the Sanius team referred to this as the onboarding process. So one of the unique aspects to this study is that patients can self-refer, which means that patients from across the UK can sign up. They don't have to attend any particular hospital or any particular site. It can all be done virtually, which we think is a really excellent aspect of the app, and really opens up the research to patients from across the country who perhaps might otherwise not be able to enroll in studies like this. So patients will self-refer and they will access the microsite, which we'll give a link to later. Once patients have self-referred via the microsite, Sanius Health are notified of the sign-up, and onboarding information is sent to the patient via the Sanius engagement team. The patient then would review a patient information sheet, which covers all of the information I've discussed so far today, as well as a great deal more information, which is available in the information sheet. And that's standard for any research study. All research studies come with a patient information sheet, as many of the attendees will know. Once patients have read the information sheet, then patients will then sign a consent form for the research study. Then there's an additional consent form, which is, as mentioned in the previous slide, something called the subject access request form. And this is a form that essentially allows us, as part of the research, to extract relevant medical data from electronic health record systems. So for instance, one of the things that we want to kind of look at is what impact different mutations have on symptom burden, as an example. And the only way we can really do that is accurately is probably by extracting this information from electronic health records. So the subject access request form allows us to do that. It allows us to interact with the electronic health records that are already in existence. And then using a form of artificial intelligence, it allows us to extract the relevant information from these electronic health records. So that's a key bit that really will allow us to gain as much information about how these diseases interlink with symptoms and various other biometric data. Having completed the subject access request form, patients will then receive their wearables. These are dispatched, and the Sanius team will then contact the patient shortly after this to provide further advice on how these should be used. I should also point out that the wearables come with a welcome letter and an extensive amount of information on how to use the wearables and how to get the most out of them. And finally, once that's happened, then the patient registration device syncing an app can be downloaded, and then you're good to go to start recording your outcomes. So this final slide is a image of how the app looks. We're going to see that in much more detail shortly, so I won't dwell on that. But what you can see here is an example of how the symptoms could be trended over time and how the MPN 10 score is calculated for each symptom on a 0 to 10 scale. And here you can see the medications and how these can be recorded. So that's it for my presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. So my name's Claire. As Prof Claire Harrison said, I'm the advanced nurse practitioner at Guy's Hospital. I've been working with MPN patients now for about 15 years. And I was asked to give a talk briefly about symptoms and why we should track symptoms. And I think for those of you that know me, know that I can talk a lot about symptoms. So I'm going to try and kind of reduce my talk about it and just focus on the types of symptoms that we know patients experience and why we should monitor or track them. So some of our understanding of the impact of living with MPNs and symptom experience comes from two large observational studies, the landmark studies. The first one was completed in the USA, and it was the first large observational study that evaluated the patient-reported impact of living with MPNs on kind of overall health and productivity. And then subsequent to that, the International MPN Landmark Survey was completed, which was completed in the UK, Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan and Italy. And it was an online survey that both MPN patients and their physicians completed. It had large numbers of patients recruited into the study. Nearly 700 patients were recruited. And the results allowed us to develop an understanding of MPN symptoms, the physical and emotional impact of living with the MPN, and also the impact on employment and patients' experience.
Claire, should your slides be moving? Because
Not
they're
yet.
not. Okay, sorry.
They should be now. There we go. So what did we learn from the international study was that actually over 90% or around 90% of patients had experienced symptoms from their MPN in the last 12 months. The MPN symptoms had a negative impact on quality of life for patients, and that it could interfere with family and social life. Some patients said that they had to plan activities carefully, not knowing when symptoms might develop, or sorry, from my experience, and talking to patients, the impact on the quality of life and kind of the activities that patients do are quite largely reflected by how they experience their symptoms on a given day. And because of the unpredictability in symptoms, it meant that you couldn't always plan your activities. You couldn't always do random activities, but activities needed to be planned, and that perhaps you were limited with activities that you could do in a week, and knowing that if you did certain things on one day, then that would limit what you could do later on in the week. Within the study, patients also reported that it could impact on relationships with their partners and their caregivers. And this isn't just sorry, I've lost my train of thought on that one, but I'll come back to that. But that it also impacted on kind of activities of daily living. So performing tasks and what you could do that would normally be part of your everyday life was then impacted. And then in turn, these all have an impact on the quality of your life. It also impacted on work. the study showed that 1/5 of all patients reported that they needed to reduce their hours at work, the average being by about 11.2 hours per week. And some patients took voluntary retirement and some took an early retirement because of the impact of living with the MPN. We know that there was also an emotional impact. So patients reported emotional hardship, anxiety and worry were reported. And significantly, 89% of patients in the survey worried that their condition could get worse. 61% of patients indicated that actually over the last 12 months, they'd experienced depression at some degree because of their MPN. So what this slide shows is some of the symptoms that patients reported. So we can see from the actual numbers on the slide that actually fatigue was by far the most experienced symptom that patients reported. And then some of the other symptoms include abdominal discomfort, shortness of breath, night sweats, difficulty sleeping, bruising, weakness, depression or sad mood, pruritus, dizziness, loss of concentration, numbness and tingling, headaches and visual changes. But I suppose what I also wanted to say is that this is not an extensive list, and actually there may be some other symptoms that you might experience that might be related to your underlying condition. I think what was also important was that from the US landmark study, they identified that actually some patients didn't realise that some of the symptoms they were experiencing could be related to their MPN. So I think whilst we say that, I think what is also important to acknowledge is that actually, whilst you might experience a symptom that we might think is because of the MPN, we always need to look around that symptom to go and exclude any other potential causes rather than just associate symptoms with the underlying MPN. It's always important to think, could there be anything else that could be contributing to the symptom that you might be experiencing? So what are the benefits of tracking symptoms? So really, it allows both yourself and us as clinicians to know what symptoms you do experience. Symptoms vary between individuals, and while some patients may not experience any symptoms when they're first diagnosed, others may. And we do know that actually symptoms don't always correlate with the stage of the disease or being on treatment or not being on treatment. Therefore, as a patient, knowing what your symptoms are is important for you to be able to have those discussions with your clinical team. It allows us to kind of know how do those symptoms impact on you. You know, if you're experiencing fatigue, what does fatigue look like for you? How does it impact on your daily life? How does it impact on relationships that you might be having? By doing that, it then allows you to discuss this and with your treating team to have that open conversation and the discussions around what may be done in order to help you manage these conditions. Another one is, are your symptoms changing? By monitoring symptoms, you can perhaps identify patterns. Are they getting worse? Are they getting better? Could there be other possible causes or other contributing factors? Is there a pattern to when they occur? So do they occur at a particular time in a month? Do they occur after you've done particular activities? And by allowing us to have this understanding, we can look at, are there other causes? Are there changes that we could suggest making that might help with these symptoms? As I said, it helps you to have informed conversations with your healthcare team. You know, it's important to share symptoms that you're experiencing with your team, because actually what we don't know, we can't help with. So I always do encourage patients to kind of have discussions around their symptoms. Sometimes it can be quite easy when you go into a symptom to have the focus being on what the blood counts are like. And, you know, sometimes you can walk in and the first thing that the discussions around is, what do my blood look like? and then perhaps blood counts are normal, and then you might sit there and you might think, oh, well, my bloods are normal, so why do I feel like I feel? And sometimes it can then be difficult to open that conversation to say that actually I'm still feeling quite bad, these are my symptoms. So I think having a tracker of your symptoms and knowing what your symptoms are do help have those conversations with your treating team. And they can also help us in looking at treatments or suggestions or other forms of interventions that we might be able to suggest to help manage those symptoms. A timeline of symptoms with new treatments. So for me, certainly as a clinician, and I'm sure my colleagues will also agree, is that actually if we know your symptoms before starting a treatment, it's important to then see how those symptoms respond once we do start a treatment. Does the treatment help in managing those symptoms or not? So I think it's very valuable when we do start patients on treatment that we do keep an eye on those symptoms to know, are we making a difference with them? An active role in managing your care. Claire Harrison mentioned that earlier about empowering patients to know about their conditions, to know about their symptoms, and to know how these symptoms might impact on them. So it enables patients to have that active role in their disease management and to have these shared care plans of what it is that they want and how we can help manage their conditions for you, because these are long-term conditions that we want you to live a lifetime with and be able to manage so that actually symptoms aren't impacting on quality of life. I've put here as well about additional services and support. And I think that's important because actually symptoms aren't always managed by pharmacological intervention. So it's not always about which medication can I take to help me manage my symptoms, but actually there are a lot of support services that can be used or accessed that might help manage some of the symptoms. So for example, here at GSTT, we use our occupational therapy service and our physiotherapy service to help patients manage fatigue. There are a lot of other community services that can be accessed that can have similar support services or additional support services. Sometimes it may be around community services that are available, such as a walking club that you can join up with to increase physical activity. There might be coffee mornings, and there might be other types of support that you can access in the community to help manage the symptoms. So if we move on to how we can track the symptoms. So you've heard from Dr. Harrington already about the MPN symptom assessment tool. So this is, and I'll try not to duplicate too much of what he said, but this is a tool that covers the 10 symptoms that we know are clinically relevant for patients with these conditions. It's a validated tool that has been through a lot of clinical trials, and it's used and has been validated for patients with MPN. As you can see, it's very visual and easy to use. I sometimes use it with patients when I'm trying to explain about the different symptoms that patients can experience. And these are a bit of a duplication, but can kind of help with the patient communication. I think what I would say with these symptoms is that you rate them on a 0 to 10. There is no defined kind of definition of what a 5 looks like. They're very individualized scores, so it's what it would mean for you. So my 5 might be very different to somebody else's 5. So what I would normally say to patients is we're looking at how this score changes and develops over time. If you're a 5 on one day and then suddenly you come and see me in clinic and it's a 10, then I know that symptom's changed for you and something is happening with that symptom, so that we need to explore what we can do to make that symptom better. You've already seen slides on the app, but what I wanted to just kind of draw attention to is it doesn't, I suppose, whilst yes, using the app is great, the MPN 10 only covers those 10 symptoms. So there are other symptoms that you might experience that will allow you to be documented in the app. However, it's not always about the app. And if you find pen and paper is just as easy to document your symptoms, then use pen and paper. I think it's important, and the most important thing to come from this is that we actually do track symptoms and that you actually monitor your symptoms. So what I would say is choose the method that is appropriate for you and that you find is best to suit your needs. And as I say, if that's good old-fashioned pen and paper, drawing diagrams, then actually as a clinician, I don't mind how your assessment or monitoring of your symptoms comes to me. It's just about having that discussion about the impact of the symptoms for you. I think that's me done.
Okay, great. I think now we're moving to Debs and Mark.
Right, hello everybody. I'm Mark. I normally do the social media for MPN Voice, and I'm a PV patient myself. Right, so bottom right-hand corner is our MPN app. So if we open it up and go to the home screen, we start off with some basic kind of stuff. Top right-hand corner is where we can put in our details. So it's personalized to us. We don't need to dwell on that one too long. And we can put in some physical data, link it to a Wyvern's watch, which you'll get taken through by the team when you sign up. And there's an option there to shut down some of the notifications and a frequently asked questions. So if you need a little bit of digital support and you don't want to phone someone up at the time, then you can get it from there. And options to sign out and delete the account completely. Moving back into the middle, one of the most important features I think about this is the notice board before we get into the nuts and bolts of the symptom stuff. On here, we wanted to provide something in an app that would allow people to build a sense of community. So the first part is the first button will take you to our website, our YouTube channel, how we can fundraise, buddy programs, some diet tips, and some podcasts for relaxation. So it's really easy to get into our website from the app and start finding information for yourself. Further down, we've got the Health Unlocked. We did look at having an option to have our own chat function and ability to build a community where everyone could talk. We teased it over for a while, and then thought, well, we've got WhatsApp, we've got messengers and many other things in our lives. So we tried to build into the app what we've already got. And our Health Unlocked forum seemed to be the most popular. If you can see there's about 10,500 members, all talking MPN stuff. The good thing about Health Unlocked is it is moderated by our team. So hopefully the stuff that you see on there is it shouldn't be false news. It should be something that people are looking at. If we see something on there that's blatantly untrue or is getting into the realms of fantasy, then one of our team will jump on there and take it down or change the conversation. So you can, if you've got a Health Unlocked to log on, you can get straight in from the app. We added some links. We talked about being able to pass information to people that to help towards their well-being. So we're using the NHS because it's a validated source. We looked at creating our own information, but it's already out there, and we're just repeating what other people are saying. So there's some quick ways to get into the NHS links. Then we're down to our featured links, and if any of you use our social media, you might have seen this before. So it's a link tree that every time I add something to social media, or if there's a forum or a vlogcast comes up, or something's posted on Instagram, or one of the patient forums is open for registration, it gets put on here. So again, another very quick way to just access information from us. And if anybody wants to see extra stuff put on there, it won't take us long. And then there's a link to our Just Giving site as well. So if you're in the mood for a bit of fundraising, then that will take you straight to the Just Giving site. So that's the kind of notice board area of it. And we're looking to develop that as we move through the journey with the app. We'll say now the app is relatively new in its development. We wanted to get it out and getting it used because that's the quickest way to find our way through any of the small problems, is allow people to help us with that. So moving down, if we go to the bottom, we've got a home screen. I've got a calendar which shows me some of my symptom tracking, but I'll come on to that in a moment. But we've got the big plus. So on a daily basis, we can move into this and we can start adding our symptoms. So MPN 10, it's relatively simple. It's a sliding scale, up and down, and then we move to the next one, early satiety, and we can flick through the standard MPN 10. And it's literally as simple as that. One of the things I've noticed since I've been trialing this for the last few months, because I'm not very good at adding data, and kind of keeping track and spreadsheets and things. But I have found that by doing this, it's a kind of process that in your mind, you're thinking about it every day. So I've started to track quite minor changes in the way that my symptoms are presenting themselves. Then we've got other symptoms. So we have headaches, tingling, which again is something I've noticed I'm getting. I'd never actually thought about that one before, but I've noticed that every morning my hands and feet are doing a lot of tingling. And then there's the ability to add other symptoms. I noticed someone in the chat had asked about that. So in here, we would add your symptom, and then you can add a note about it, and it will start to track that. You can see there my latest note was a bit of numbness. As we scroll down the home screen, it gives us more measurements for the ones that we're inputting. That line's kind of dropping off right away there on my MPN 10 because I didn't actually add anything then. And your scores will show up as bars or graphs. As you can see there, I'm woefully inadequate in my activity at the moment. My sleeping's not too good, but my nighttime oxygen levels are quite high. Then we get into our blood. So when we're adding the bloods, we hit the plus again, and in the clinical top right-hand corner, it allows us to put in blood results, and you just flick through them and add them as per your blood results. This is done manually. At the moment, there's no way to drag this from the NHS's system and present it on the app because there's so many NHS systems. It would be almost impossible to keep going back and adding every time one of the trusts change their system. But it is something we're thinking about and we're talking about with Sanius, and I know they're looking at it as well. Also, on the plus sign, we've got reminders. So it gives us the ability to put in medication and appointments. And once you've got a reminder in there, it will come up and you'll get a nice little notification on your phone. You can set the periodicity of it and it will come up and remind you. But I know for not everybody wants to see that. So we have had some feedback, but there is the way to turn off the notification so you don't have to see that. And on the chat function is the direct line to Sanius to get some help through messages or frequently asked questions. The top screen there where it says daily check-in, that's just another way to get to the adding the symptoms and the reminders and the blood counts. I think that's probably it from a very swift fly through the app. Medical adherence is just giving me a graph to whether I'm taking my tablets or not.
So Mark, do you want to just scroll up again a little bit? And so, for example, go on to the graph where you've got your blood. So where it says hemoglobin, and just click on the extra. So once you've actually input all your blood scores, you can go back and view them by using this functionality, and then you can go back and see, for example, if you've put in dates, information, you can go and have a look at hemoglobin for this year, or you can change the calendar and have a look at it for a certain week or day, and you can go and do that with everything that is actually scored. I've had a couple of questions that people weren't able to go back and see what they'd actually put in, so it was a question of how would you actually do that, and you can use that calendar there to do it. And you've got your marks there.
Yeah, you can zoom in and zoom out of the.
So Mark, do you want to go back as well to the graph of the MPN 10 symptoms? Because again, once you've actually put those in, if you go, for example, you can export them basically. So I'm just looking at the, you get that, there you go. So if you actually look at sorry, we've got, yes.
Yeah, that's the export button.
So that export button means that you are able to export them and print them off on a PDF. So if you wanted to print them off and physically take them rather than show them on the app, you are able to do that, and it's a very useful, or certainly will be very useful for some. And it's available on on your total MPN 10, and it's available on your individual symptoms. It's also available on your overall bloods and your individual bloods as well.
Okay, so I think that's absolutely great, and I think at this point we're probably ready to move to questions and answers. what I can see, there's a couple of questions in the chat about people who've registered, and Muna has been answering in the chat about looking to see where people are and saying that we're on, the Sanius team are onboarding people in blocks. There's a question in the chat about from, I think it's from Jean, about saying that she registered interest at the London Forum, and does this count as signing up? Muna's put a comment back in the chat about probably better to go through the micro site, but I don't know, Debbie, whether you wanted to comment on that, because we did have a list of people who had registered at the forum, and we did pass that list on, I think, didn't we?
Yes, so we do have a master list of people that have registered. The rollout of the watches and the launch has been a staggered rollout. So the first 50 patients that have received an invitation and the watch actually came from that list. We had a meeting this morning, and Patrick is going to review it, and we will start to work through the list. So everybody will be reached, but we're just doing it in manageable cycles. So those registrations that we had are still valid, and we do have them, and we will be getting to you shortly.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Debs, for that. And then just on, there's another comment that's actually come from Vicky. Thanks, Vicky, for your comment in the chat. I can see platelet levels as an option when I go to add blood test results, but it's not on the homepage list.
So that was where I was saying, if you go to the hemoglobin, and then up at the top, you get all your individual blood groups that are measured. And if you click onto platelets there, that's where it will come.
That's great. And then I just wanted to, there's a nice question that's come pre-submitted from Ian Clark. Thank you very much, Ian. I think we've answered the question about the objectives of the study and are there research questions, but happy to pop those in the chat. The question is about handling natural variability of subjective data within and between participants, and very different experience and perceptions. And I suppose one of the first thing to say is we would handle an individual person as their own control and look at changes over time, but we would also be looking at the collective of patients. And then there's another question about subjective data. I'm guessing, just for example, that would be symptom scoring, being collected using ordinal scales, and how will we process that? So I think it's important to say that the analysis that's been done in the background here is really very complex. And Patrick, I didn't know whether you might want to speak to that and talk a little bit about some of the preliminary data that we've already been able to see.
Yeah, so we actually had a meeting earlier. So the team from Sanius are working with us, looking at the data, and we've got about 50 patients, 40 to 50 patients who've already signed up. So we're already starting to look at what the links are between activity and symptom scores, and we're seeing some really interesting findings. So we can map that just in our kind of overview of the patients, total group of patients who've signed up already across the whole of the MPN spectrum. And we can already see some interesting things, which we're really excited to delve into more and look into the impact of different treatments, for instance, as well as the variability across the different MPN spectrum. So yeah, I think once we've got more mature data and a larger population of patients, it's going to be really informative, and really the sky's the limit in terms of what we might find out with this app. As mentioned, this is really providing big data. There's so many different variables that we're collecting, all of which we can see how they interlink with each other. Yeah, it's just really exciting.
Great.
I also saw a couple of questions about oxygen saturations and ECG. I don't know if someone from Sanius, so these two functions of the Withings watch are slightly different to the other biometric data. They don't happen automatically. So for the ECG BPM, which is essentially the heart rate, but it also does has a quick look at the heart rhythm and can provide some feedback on things like heart rhythm. And night SpO2, there's a different way to record those. I don't know if someone from Sanius can.
Yeah, sure,
Orlando.
Patrick. Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
We can. Did you want to introduce yourself, Orlando? Thank you so much for joining. I know you've done a
No
vlog
props.
with Nona before, but
I have. It's a pleasure to meet everyone on the call. I'm Orlando. I head up Sanius, and I'm also a patient with a different rare disease, not an MPN. However, to answer Patrick's question, so and Mina's team, Mina is our VP for everything patients. So on the device, once you get it, there's a feature that allows you to switch on SpO2, which records overnight every night, and you can, I think there's a button that you can increase the frequency, so that automatically happens once you switch it on, but you have to put it on manually because it will only allow you to do it that way. And then for ECG, the device that we've chosen, and we've looked at lots of devices, almost all devices, and we landed on Withens. As a group, we don't have any special relationship with Withens, bar what we do in research. However, for ECG, what patients or participants would need to do is, and again, there's a video on this, so we can send a how-to video. You would need to scroll down to ECG, stay relatively still, and then push the pin on your watch, and it will record an ECG, which goes both into your Withens wallet and into your Sanius app, or your My MPN app, sorry. So we'll send out 2 videos, either via colleagues from MPN to share with this group on how to in those 2 features. And if there are any specific questions, you can always reach out to the Sanius Health team to support with that as well.
Thanks, Orlando. There's another question I've seen from Vicky, which says, will the findings of the data analysis be presented in accessible formats, such as the conversation rather than journals? Which is a really good question. I'm not aware of the conversation actually, but we will aim to present this data in meetings such as this one. We'll provide regular updates, as well as the patient day, which typically happens in November. So we will aim to present these findings at patient accessible meetings, but would be interested to hear more about the conversation. I don't know if other people are aware of this.
yeah, and Vicky, you're on the call actually. Maybe you could tell us what that is. But we're very happy to keep showing you data from the app. It's super important for us.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about the conversation. It's just because I'm based in a university, so I've come across it. It's essentially a news website where all the news is kind of blog post. It's where academics are writing about their research, but they're doing it in a kind of newsy, publicly accessible way, rather than a journal where it would be quite dry, depending on the topic. So I think it's restricted to certain universities that kind of pay into it, but there might be someone somewhere that knows whether or not the universities you're associated with have access to it. But really it was just so that the public have got access to it rather than journals, because although they're going open access, the papers themselves aren't all that accessible to non-academics.
I think that's a really important point, and I'm sure, Patrick, you agree. I think, we want to keep sharing the data from the app with everyone who's involved. Any new insights that we get from the app, we will be sharing, of course, in, as many forums as we possibly can. But we will only get data if you guys put it in. So thank you so much for everyone who's, registered. It's great to see all the interest and the comments in the chat. I can see a question about allele burden. I love that question because that's coming from something that we're very interested in the disease area. And just to talk about what that actually is. So that is the amount of mutated, for example, JAK2 or CALR that the patient has, and it's expressed as a percentage. We've talked about that, and we're talking about that quite a lot currently in kind of expert disease groups, and we talk to you as our patients about this a lot too. I think it's something that we could add as functionality to the app, and you know, we will be, of course, tweaking the app over time, but at present, because people don't usually get allele burden measured very often, and our labs aren't all set up to measure it, we wouldn't put it in. But Patrick, I'm sure we could take these kind of modifications. And there's also a comment about entering the hematocrit as well. I don't know if you've seen that.
I think we've
question.
got hematocrit. Hematocrit should be in there, I'm pretty sure, unless I'm mistaken. But
yes, I think
it's
about
not,
the display and the accuracy of the display, and where the red blob is, etc.
Okay, I'll look at that one. But just going back to the allele burden question, that is something that we potentially will be able to extract from electronic health records where it is being performed. So patients who are having that done, you know, we will search for the term, for instance, JAK2, and then we will ideally be able to extract that data. And so that's something that we should be able to track. I mean, that's a work in progress. We don't know how easy that will be to do, but that's something we're aspiring to.
Okay, there's also a question, just staying with data. The question is about the type of data that's held. So I think it's just important to perhaps just touch on this again. So this comes from Mel Fox. The app privacy policy refers to medical records not related to MPNs. Will all this data be retained? If so, why? So my stab at that would be, what is really important and we don't always capture in a hospital is things like, do you have high blood pressure? Have you developed another complications? We don't always hear about it, and we don't always reflect it accurately. And also, we might be able to see from this kind of data some associations, for example, between the MPN and, for example, another condition. So lots of comments about inflammation and arthritis, etc. So we'll be able to pick up those associations if we collect that data, but we will collect it and keep it private. Patrick, I don't know whether you want to also pick up on that.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. You know, we're not looking to extensively mine every aspect of people's health records. We will be looking at things that are considered adjacent to the MPN diagnosis, at least. But you know, we don't want to miss things either. So yeah, the key things like cardiovascular risk factors are, you know, really important in these conditions. So that's certainly something that we would want to pick up.
Okay, so I think we've pretty much covered any questions that were pre-submitted on the app, and we've slowed down a little bit on questions in the chat. So I'm going to pick a couple of questions that have come in more specifically related to disease, and I'm going to ask Claire Woodley to comment on these. So one is, how do ET patients, this has come from Jennifer, effectively deal with consistent flushing or feeling warm? And a second question about tongue tingling being a symptom. So Claire, if you're still here, I don't know whether you want to answer that one, please.
Right, yeah. So in terms of heat flushing, I suppose we'd want to know the pattern of when it's occurring. Is it during the day? Is it at random kind of times? Is it associated with any other functions or things that are happening around that time? How do other patients manage it? You know, we have to look at, I suppose it's probably related to when it occurs as to whether there's any other underlying contributors, and also if we think about how to manage it. Sometimes it's around what you're doing at the time, If it's at night, sometimes we would look at and saying, well, the environment of the room that you're sleeping in, is it to do with the type of clothing you wear at night? Is it the temperature of the room? Is it the bed sheets? So there are certainly kind of other things that we could look at to say, try to manage the flushing at night. And then kind of if we think about the tongue tingling, we know patients can get numbness and tingling because of their MPNs. Whether that's specific to the tongue, I personally haven't come across patients reporting specific tongue tingling secondary to their MPNs. It would be important to kind of rule out any other potential mineral or vitamin deficiencies that could be exacerbating the tingling to the tongue, I think. So it's like looking at B12, looking at folate levels. And again, I would suggest kind of when does it happen? Are there any other contributing factors to the tingling of the tongue? Personally, from my experience, and I'm not sure if anyone else can add to it, it's not something that I come across or have come across is reporting specific tingling to the tongue.
I would totally agree with you, Claire. I haven't encountered tingling of the tongue, but I think it's an example of something that probably not really to put down to your MPN, and just go and have a chat to your GP about. Do ask your MPN team, but we would probably deflect that question back to your GP, to be honest. It's a fairly unusual symptom. So let's pick another question. There was a question about allele burden, which I think we've answered. That's generally a blood test, not routinely done, but it's very live in terms of questions and research. There are questions about avoiding the sun and skin cancer. In general, I'll take that one, and then I'm going to ask Patrick to pick a question and answer that one. But I would generally say that, just because you've got an MPN doesn't absolve you from being careful in the sun and following the type of advice that we would give to other people. So be careful in the sun, wear a high sunscreen, wear a hat, especially if you're taking hydroxycarbamide or ruxolitinib, or you have had a problem with your skin before. And I just want to flag that we will be doing a webinar on skin cancer with a dermatologist and skin problems with MPNs in September. So just to advertise that. Patrick, is there a specific question you might want to answer from the spreadsheet?
Yeah, there's a couple down in the general section which I can cover. So one of these is from Gail. Should everyone have a bone marrow biopsy to get a true definitive diagnosis of their MPN? So the answer to that is not necessarily, but generally speaking, in the vast majority of our cases, we would tend to do that. And the reason for that is we get a lot more information from the bone marrow biopsy that isn't available from blood tests. So that it would include the bone marrow trephine, which is the piece of the bone that is taken out, which allows us to look at the architecture of the cells and how they interact with each other, and the appearance of the cells called megakaryocytes, which are the cells that make platelets. And these have distinct appearances which actually differ slightly across the different range of MPNs. The other thing that we can do when we look at the bone marrow is look at the degree of fibrosis through something called a reticulin stain. So this offers really informative insights and allows us to subclassify MPN diagnosis more accurately. So generally speaking, we would typically advise patients to have a bone marrow biopsy, although we understand it's not a pleasant procedure. And if patients are very reluctant to do that, we can always have that discussion. It's obviously a patient's choice what they choose to do. I'll pick up another one. What length of time is recommended between telephone appointments after blood tests? I think that refers to the intervals between appointments potentially. If it means the time after the blood test, then the telephone appointment should obviously be as soon as possible after the blood test. If it's referring to the interval between telephone appointments, that would vary dependent on the patient's situation. Often if a patient is very stable and is not having any change in their treatments and their condition is stable, then we often see patients at 3 monthly intervals, or perhaps longer if patients are very stable and not requiring any treatment at all. There's another question about what course of action is open if patients are not referred to an MPN expert. So what I would suggest to that one is it's the patient's right to always access a second opinion. What would be probably required in that situation is if a haematologist is saying that they don't think that a referral is warranted, then you can access a referral via your GP. So you'd need to seek out your GP and request a referral for a second opinion, and that is a patient's right to do so. I don't know if Claire Woodley has any questions, I think, that you would like to answer, or Prof. I can do another one. Okay. Do you have to go onto medication at the age of 60 from an ET patient? So the answer to this is you don't have to do anything. It's your choice what you choose to do. What we would suggest is that patients do go onto cytoreductive therapy above this age, because the data that we have shows that patients above this age are at heightened risk of having complications from their condition, and they can be quite significant. So these can include things like, as most people on the call will know, cardiovascular thrombotic complications, which is really the key thing that we're trying to avoid. So that's why at that age cutoff, we typically would advise patients to go on treatment, and some patients will go on at a younger age, and some patients may decide that they don't want to, will decide to go on at an older age. And we can have that discussion with your treating clinician. We recognize that everyone is different, but we do have to have a cutoff somewhere, and that's what the data that we have accumulated over the years has suggested, that above that age threshold, the risk of these complications is increased. That's where that recommendation comes from.
Okay, that's
Patrick,
great. Claire, go ahead.
I was just going to say a couple of the questions that have come in on the chat about some of the symptoms and disagreeing perhaps when you're told that a symptom's not because of your MPN. I mean, I think don't stop having those conversations is what I would say. And actually, we recognise that bone pain is a symptom of an MPN, and that's why it's on the MPN 10 form, because we know of it as a common important symptom to discuss. I suppose it's about explaining the bone pain. So joint pains, not so much because of MPN, but actually those kind of deep gnawing aches that you can get in the longer bones of your body, we would say would be related. And I suppose it's with going with an MPN 10 score, that probably kind of gives you that opening to discuss about that it is a symptom that can be related to the MPN, and that actually you want to be able to discuss this symptom more with your consultant, because it's something that's kind of ongoing for you and is impacting on you. So I think actually by having your symptom recorded and having that track of that bone pain, equally, it is important to rule out any other potential causes of bone pain. So actually what we see quite a lot of in our practice is vitamin D deficiency in patients, because naturally in the UK we don't get much sunlight. So actually some patients can be vitamin D deficient. So kind of also looking at potential other causes for having the symptom is equally important. But what I would say is, even, if you find that actually your symptoms not listened to, and I would like to think as kind of part of a clinical team is that we do listen to patients. I appreciate that's not always the experience that patients have, but actually, don't not discuss your symptoms with a clinical team, and do go back and, if you've tried kind of ruling out other causes, is keep having those conversations with your clinical team about your symptoms. There was another one about restless leg syndrome in the evening. We do see that sometimes with patients with PV, where we make them iron deficient. and being low in iron can cause that restless leg syndrome for patients. So, if you're a PV patient and you're low in iron, then yes, you could potentially be experiencing restless legs.
Okay, that's great. So I'll pick up a few questions now. Just picking out a few. What course of action is open to MPN patients when the haematologist refuses to allow referral to an MPN expert? So the first thing to say,
I did that one.
you've done that one. So sorry,
Yeah.
I'm trying to listen to an update on the CALR vaccine study at the same time. Great. What about update on the CALR antibody study? So all of the CALR directed therapy studies, including the one that I'm listening to a safety data for at the moment, are at a very, very early stage. So these are what is called first in human trials. So there are probably less than 30 patients who've had any one of the 3 current studies that are active. Very early stages, some activity. We will plan to run a webinar on these later in the year, and we will update at the MPN Advances Day. And they are open in the UK, but in general, we would want to think very carefully about risk-benefit analysis for patients. There's also a question about, do you have to go onto medication at the age of 60? Did you answer that one, Patrick?
Yes, I did that one as well. We've
Oh,
chosen the same
we're
ones.
picking the same ones. Okay. I'm on interferon. Should I worry if my white counts drop to 3.2? I think this is an example of somewhere where, you need to speak to your local team. It depends on your general health and other aspects of your white count. There's also a question about liver function tests on interferon. Interferon can inflame the liver a bit, which is why we usually monitor these tests. Mostly they're mild abnormalities, but it is something that, again, the team would generally look at. Then there is a question about length of time between telephone appointments after blood tests. That's really tailored.
I did that one as well.
Individual. Okay. Rusfertide. How about updates on Rusfertide? Did you do that?
No.
All right.
You can drop that. It's a tricky one.
So Rusfertide is it's a treatment for PV, and basically it's aiming to reduce the availability of iron and replace venesections for patients. It's in clinical trials. It's not yet at the point of being approved. And there are some centres for that study in the UK. We're currently updating the MPN Voice website. Now, shall I talk about kidneys? Did you do that one?
No, go for it.
And then I'm going to let you choose.
Okay.
So Jeff's asked a few questions about damage to kidneys observed in about 30% of MPN patients. Is a reflection of bone marrow fibrosis? Not necessarily. There is some kidney diseases can occur in tandem with other conditions. For good example, diabetes, kidney disease. We also recognise that some patients with MPN can get kidney disease related to their MPN, probably due to inflammation. I haven't seen any data directly reflecting that to degree of fibrosis. And the amount of fibrosis can vary between patients, and it's usually reported at grade 0, 1, 2, or 3. We have run a webinar in the past couple of years ago about bone marrow biopsies and fibrosis, and we can do another one again if you would like. Patrick, you can choose now.
Okay, so a couple of questions on PV. What is the latest research in terms of treatment for PV? So one of the areas that's being quite actively researched in the UK and across Europe at the moment is the use of ruxolitinib in PV. So as many people will know, ruxolitinib is now NICE approved for treatment in PV patients as a second-line treatment. So patients who've had prior hydroxycarbamide are now able to access ruxolitinib, which is a JAK inhibitor. And the research that has already been performed that looked into this, led by Professor Harrison, was the MAGIC study, which showed there was a correlation between the reduction in the level of the JAK2 that can be detected in the bone marrow cells and the likelihood of having any complications from the conditions, what we term the event-free survival. So it was the first time we could show that a reduction in the amount of JAK2 that we could detect was linked with better outcomes. So that was really exciting. And what we're now doing in the PV setting is looking at patients who get ruxolitinib as a first-line treatment, and that's being done through the Mithridate study, which we're running at Guy's and St Thomas's. So this is for people who either have a new diagnosis of PV or haven't had previous treatment and are considered to be high risk. So they have to be high risk for thromboembolic, so blood clotting complications. And the Mithridate study is really interesting. That's being performed in collaboration with centres across France as well. So that's a really exciting study, which is currently running, and we hope to have some more updates on that soon. And then another question below is, can medicines reverse this condition? That's a really interesting question. So previously, the answer to this, we would always say that the only curative treatment for MPNs in general, but more specifically myelofibrosis, as it's more commonly condition in which this treatment is used, would be an allogeneic stem cell transplantation. So that's the only curative condition. However, with the increased availability of these molecular tests that allow us to monitor things like the JAK2 allele burden, which we've discussed a few times today, we are seeing that there is potential that some of these treatments can reduce the level of that, the mutation that we can detect. And what we have to now really work out is how much that reduction in mutation burden actually correlates with a reversal of the condition. So that's what we're really starting to see. So it's a really active area of interest. So the answer to that is really that this is really being researched actively now, but it does appear that a number of the medications that we use do have that effect of reducing the amount of the mutation and perhaps reversing the condition to an extent.
Okay. There is a question on low iron making folk feel tired. Claire Woodley, I don't know whether you might want to cover that one. I promise this is the last question I'm going to throw to you. The question is, why does my low iron make me feel so tired when I've got plenty of red blood cells to carry oxygen? Patrick, I'm guessing you didn't answer that one already.
No.
That would have been helpful, had he? I suppose because we know that when patients are iron deficient, you can feel tired when you're iron deficient. So the tiredness doesn't normally always relate to your level of hemoglobin. So you can be iron deficient and have a normal hemoglobin and feel fatigued. It depends on the cause of the iron deficiency as well. So obviously for our PV patients, you know, we wouldn't routinely replace iron levels, because what that would do is, if we gave you iron, that would actually kind of say to your bone marrow, here you go, here's all the ingredients you need to make your red blood cells, off you go. And then we'd end up venesecting you more because of that. So there's not always a correlation between your iron level and your hemoglobin and you feeling tired because of a low iron level. I think what that will probably lead into is, there was another question about fatigue in the chat, and about how can we manage fatigue for patients. And for me, fatigue's, you know, it's a particularly troublesome symptom that actually is a multifactorial symptom. And unfortunately, as a treating team, we don't have a kind of an answer that can say we can take away your fatigue. Some treatments will help manage fatigue. Others may not be so quite as effective on managing fatigue. But really, it's about kind of saying, well, how is the fatigue? We know that it's multifactorial. We know there are many components that can impact on fatigue, and sometimes it's more around understanding the fatigue that a person will experience. So we know fatigue can be very physical. It can actually be a cognitive fatigue, so a way of thinking and processing and managing kind of communication and that. Sometimes it can be an emotional fatigue, and all of them will all impact on patients in different ways. And some days you might be having a very physical fatigue. Other days, I would say to patients, other days the body's willing, but the mind is not willing. And the techniques that we can use and put into patients' care to help manage depend on that particular type of fatigue that you're experiencing. And sometimes it's, you know, if it's a cognitive day and the kind of fatigue is at its worst, then maybe it's around those activities that might help focus the mind. So a word search might help manage days when the cognitive fatigue is at its worst. I think when I talk about kind of fatigue with patients, we talk about that kind of energy bank that you have, or that battery that you have that is your energy. And it's important to kind of look at how much energy is in your battery for a particular day, and then to kind of go, well, actually, if I do one particular activity, how much of my battery is that going to deplete of energy? And then what is it that I can do that actually will recharge? And I think it's important that we kind of think about how we pace and prioritize activities, because what we don't want is for those batteries to be completely empty, because then you're flat, and actually then you are resting for a long period of time while you try to recover it. So sometimes it's about kind of acknowledging how our fatigue levels are, and then managing around that, and then thinking about, well, you know, what is it that I do that actually gives me back the energy? Because I think we're all very good at kind of going, right, well, this is what I need to do in a day, and I must pack everything of this into the day. We're then out thinking, well, what is it that gives me back the energy that I've spent on all the tasks that I needed to do? And sometimes that might be going for a walk. Sometimes that might be sitting in a quiet room and actually not talking or speaking to anybody, and just replenishing that. We know that physical activity is really good for patients with fatigue, and the importance of kind of having some activity in your day can help manage those fatigue levels. I'll stop there because I could probably spend the rest of the half an hour talking about fatigue.
We'll bring you back to talk about fatigue, because I know, Claire, that you're super passionate about it, because you know how much impact it has for patients. And I know that you're currently doing a research project on it. And this is another example of how the app will actually help us to be able to monitor and get output from things like your research project. So I am just going to make a couple of comments about the remaining questions that were pre-submitted. Just very quickly. One, there's a question about deep vein thrombosis and PV. Thrombosis is a common, that's blood clotting, is a common problem with MPN. So probably there is a link. There are plenty of questions about clinical trials. Do ask your healthcare providers about trials, and do keep an eye on the MPN Voice website, because Alicia is updating that with the help of doctors across the country. And then I just want to end on a positive note. There's a question here about how many patients progress to acute leukemia. I know that's a worry for patients, but this is an uncommon event for patients. So I really want to highlight that this is uncommon for patients, and there are important things that you can do to reduce your risk of leukemia. For example, not smoking and being fit. So you will have seen a lot of information in the news this week about obesity, and how obesity is linked to it's the second most common cause of cancer underneath smoking. So there are things that we can do to help our health, and that it's important to do even if you have an MPN. Most of my patients over the course of the last nearly 30 years in practice have lived long and full lives with these conditions, and MPN Voice and the clinical community are there to support you in that. So at this point, I'm going to thank everyone who's been on the webinar and hand over to Nona, who's going to close. I'm loving all the comments in the chat and all the little emoji reactions. Such an interactive webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. And then Nona, I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to you.
I'd just like to say a huge thank you on behalf of all the MPN patients to all of you who've put so much work in to developing this app. You know, I've been around with MPN Voice for a long time, and this is one of the most exciting things that we're doing in the way that we move forward with MPN Voice. I have to say also, and thanks to Patrick and Claire, who have managed to raise a lot of money for getting the app, to fund the app. I can't forget Sanius, who've been our partners and been amazingly helpful. And finally, Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation, who we are under their umbrella as a charity. In order to be able to do the work that MPN Voice does, the routine work, we are reliable on funding. And this last slide is, if you feel that you can, it doesn't matter if it's a couple of pounds or whatever, because every single penny counts, donate to MPN Voice. It allows us to continue with the work that we do. And I would say a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today. Please, just a reminder, if you could give us feedback so that we know what you would like from the next year's webinars and forums. Stay safe, and a huge thank you to everybody. It's been the most super amazing webinar, and I couldn't have enjoyed it more. And I'm sure there are a lot of you who would agree with me. Good night or good morning in Australia, and see you soon.